Friends, I'm really excited today to have a special guest with us. We have Mandy Pearce, owner of Funding for Good. Mandy, hello, welcome.
Hey, welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Mandy, um, I know you are the owner and the CEO and the person that created Funding for Good. Can you tell us a little bit about your educational trajectory and then maybe what is Funding for Good?
Sure. So I don't know that my educational trajectory had a lot to do with my business, but I went to school and got my bachelor's degree in sociology, and then I got my master's degree in special education with a focus on behavior modification. So did a lot of work in nonprofits, had one for-profit job working for General Electric, and then after the economy crashed in 2011, got back into the nonprofit world working for the county, and had a lot of experience there writing grants for nonprofits in my spare time, and lost my job when the economy crashed back in no, I meant when the economy crashed the first time, back 9/11, so it was 2001. Then when the economy crashed in 2009, I was unemployed, and I got scammed by a company in California, and that led me to offering my first grant writing workshop. And that first grant writing workshop led me 4 years later to taking my part-time business full-time. And in 2016, I went full-time with Funding for Good, and have been doing that ever since.
I see, you know what? I see your trajectory, like it's special education, personalizing and aligning people's needs to something. I can definitely see it in what you do. So certainly. So Mandy, tell us, what is your business? What do you do in your business?
Sure. So we do nonprofit consulting, and we do everything that relates to development. So board development, strategic planning, executive coaching, development coaching, capital campaigns, fundraising, grant writing, template creation, all those things. If it has to do with raising money and creating sustainability for your organization long term, then we do it.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I'm really inspired on that whole concept of growing. I love how in higher education, we talked about planting seeds so they can
Yes.
grow. And so I see a lot of similarities with your mission and actually what we do at College Foundation, where we provide services for families, students, and counselors to really think about education and to think about education in a different way, because we recognize and Mandy, it's funny that you mentioned that your education has nothing to do with what you do, but for me, it has everything to do with what you do, because it was this one step led to another step, led to another step. And that's something that we like to be very upfront with the students, that all of us come from so different careers, different ideas, and therefore it's just never a linear way to reach our goal. It's just very different. So really, that's really what part of the conversation that we want to talk to you about, is that intersection with for helping people to grow for good, right? And for us,
Yes.
it's through education. But in order for us to get people through to education, Mandy, a big concern, it's usually concern number one, it's being able to afford college.
Sure.
And that becomes a big part of what Juana Hernandez, my colleague, also state representative for CFNC, and I end up doing a lot of our time is just finding ways, creative ways to make it work.
Sure.
Can you, so I know very little, and what I know about grant writing and finding money is because I learned it from you, Mandy, in one of your workshops that you gracefully allowed me to attend. But I see a lot of similarities in terms of we have to find a place that can fund us, right? That could be a foundation, an individual, an institution. And so that's really where you start this big process of looking for where to start. Tell us about that process of finding first, like locating where this money may be located.
Sure. So when we're talking about college outside the nonprofit world, we're looking at not only places that have competitions available for you to compete for dollars, but places that have scholarships available where your things you've already done will give you merit to qualify and apply for those scholarships. So maybe it's that you attended a certain high school, or that you participated in a particular extracurricular activity, or that you're from a particular county. So, there's a lot of different ways to find companies and businesses that have competitions out there. You may have to write an essay to submit, or you may have to apply, sort of like a grant cycle, but there's a lot of different opportunities. The big, huge thing that I would encourage everyone to take away, and hopefully you're not listening to this past this time point for you and your family, but you need to at least give yourself a year before high school graduation if you're going to start looking for scholarships. And if you have a year and a half, it's not too early to start, because many of the scholarships, competitions, and grants that are available, you have to apply for them a year before you're going to graduate. So you'll put a submission in your junior year. You won't find out if you're still funding until your senior year. So if you're waiting until your senior year to look, if you're looking for federal funding through Pell Grants or that type of thing, maybe that's fine because you can get your FAFSA in your senior year. But if you're looking for competition dollars, scholarships, and competitions, then you really need to start looking in your senior year. And then you have a lot more opportunities. I had a professor from ASU, one, I know you went there, that reached out to me because she wanted to find funding for her son for college, for scholarships. And the guy had like every possible extracurricular thing on his resume. He had great volunteer experience. He was in all the activities at school. He had jobs. He had a great GPA, all these different things. But she waited until halfway through his senior year to start looking. And I really couldn't find much for her because I was like, he qualified for everything, but you've just waited too long to start looking. And so that is really the big piece for funding for school, is that you're planning ahead of time.
Yeah, and Mandy, and I would say that that's one of the things that Juanes and I try to emphasize to the families and the students that we work with, that you have to start early. That preparation is key, and really, I love that you're saying you have to give yourself at least a year, because what we see is like a lot of times students will start applying maybe a few months before they go to college, and so they're not really giving themselves that year. And so having that preparation and organizing yourself as a student is really important. And so, what are some, I guess, as students are looking for scholarships, what are some things that they can do as far as like, how can they prepare? How can their students prepare for that process?
So I think there's two answers to that. One, being educated in your freshman year of high school to know what you need to accomplish to qualify for a lot of the applications that are coming out. Does it have to do with your extracurriculars? Does it have to do with your GPA or the classes you take? Or if you're doing any college enrollment while you're in high school, like what are the things? So at least a checklist from counselors at the beginning of the freshman year is very helpful for parents and for students. Because sometimes students get it, never give it to the parents, and vice versa. So at least giving them a leg up to saying, if you want scholarships and you think you want to go to college here or there or whatever, these are some things to keep in mind. That's step one. And then step two is, there's a lot of ways to do research, and there's a lot of ways to think about who might fund you. Part of that's going to have to do with where do you want to go to school, and part of that's going to have to do with what do you want to go to school for. The other part of that is going to be, what demographic do you fill? If you are a person of color, there are going to be specific scholarships that are available to you that are not to others. If you are a male versus a female, there are going to be scholarships available for one or the other. If you have a particular skill set, like if you've participated in a particular sport, or it doesn't have to be through the school either. You could be doing equestrian activities, like in your community. You could be horseback riding. You could be swimming. It doesn't have to be on the school swim team. But there's a lot of different activities. So depending on all of those demographics, then socioeconomic comes into that. What is your household income? That definitely opens up some doors or shuts some doors. And what are you wanting to go to school for? Because right now there are a lot of fields. I'll take aviation, for example. The current number of pilots, commercial pilots that are out there, is getting ready to do a massive decline because most of them were baby boomers, and there was a huge number of pilots. There weren't jobs open for a long time. Well, when these baby boomers start retiring, which they are right now, there's nobody to take their place. There's nobody currently being trained up to fill all those spots. So there are a lot of dollars out there to help cover the cost of those folks going to school, because our society has realized there's a huge gap coming, right? And so we want to help fill it. So there's people helping support that. So depending on the industry you're wanting to go in, you may find dollars available for your schooling because folks know we need to fill a gap. So there's a lot of different ways to think about, do I go to industries? Do I go to people who support that type of, if you're a soccer player, look at the companies who make soccer balls, soccer nets, who support and sponsor soccer teams. Who are the people that are promoting that? They want to see folks doing well in soccer, so they're going to make scholarships available. Ballet, look at the companies that make ballet shoes, point shoes, Marley floors, all the equipment that goes into ballet, all the companies, all the designers for the costumes and things like that. And those people have scholarships available. If you're doing any kind of art, so ballet could be included, maybe you're looking at your United Arts Councils around the country. Maybe you're looking at the statewide arts councils. They have scholarships as well. So there's a lot of different ways to just sit down and say, who all has a finger in the pie of whether it's funding a particular thing or a particular demographic, and then you start looking for those types of dollars.
I love that one, you're giving us ideas to think out of the box, because a lot of times with students, I feel like, for example, we have done a lot of the research for the students at CFNC. We have a listing of scholarships. It's not all scholarships, but are some great starting points.
Sure.
We have also research about careers and about even like how much they even might pay beginning salary. So we have done a lot of that investigation work, but I feel like a lot of times clarifying early enough what you're looking for, I think that's really gonna help you to have an alignment of your mission, of the reason of what you need that funding for, right?
Sure.
It's not like, oh, I just want to go to college, but no, I want to be a pilot. That's the reason I want to go to college. So that really opens up a little bit more doors. So I love how you're helping us to think outside of the box and looking for those ways that also support education. The strategy that I always share with the students, I always said, start in your backyard. What do you have around you that provide funding for college? Like, I know in my local community, we have a lawyer that provides funding for college because he wants students from this local area to go to college. I think about houses of worship, synagogues, churches. I got some funding through my specific church, sports, and then I go into my state, and that's where CFNC has a lot of those scholarships. Then I go into national. What are those national scholarships? Is that also something similar, Mandy, that you look for your strategy when you're trying to fund some of these programs?
Yes. So, it was funny when you just said that. I was like, why don't I have a pre-research questionnaire for scholarship seekers? Because we have it for grant seekers, right? And I'm thinking some of those questions are the same. Like, what's your geographic focus? Twofold. Where did you live? Because there's people that want to fund that. But then where you want to go to school? So, people that want to fund Catawba County, North Carolina college students, there's going to be a limited number. But people that want to fund people attending school in North Carolina is different, right? So geographic focus could be different. And then asking questions like, where have you been involved in having a checklist of sports? If so, which ones? Extracurriculars, if so, which ones? Did you serve as a leadership role in a club or some kind of group? If so, which ones? For how long? Have you been employed? What's your GPA, final GPA? So being able to like have a written page where people can answer these questions, and then they take that information and start searching, okay, who wants to fund soccer students? Who wants to fund pre-med? Who wants to fund aviation? Whatever. Then your searching becomes a lot easier because you've answered the questions, as opposed to just jumping on the internet and being like, I don't have like a set of variables to start with, right? So that might be something I create as a result of this.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Mandy, I know that organizations and programs pay you lots of money for what you do. And thank you so much for the opportunity to sit down and talk to us. I do know, I remember from your class very clearly something, and I wanted to bring it up, that part of the strategy for funding is not really this funder is gonna give me all the funds to fund that particular program.
Right.
To have a strategy and a diverse portfolio of things. And I feel like the same thing we tell the students in just maybe a different way, but we talk to them about the strategy for funding their higher education or post-secondary education. It has to be family. You know, your family has a responsibility. We can do it through scholarships, filing the FAFSA. Let's talk about that self obligation, because I know, for example, some of the funding that you have, sometimes they ask you, what have you received already and what commitment do you have from yourself? Can you tell us about that a little bit? Because I feel it applies to our groups when we're having the conversation of, have you guys talked about higher education, or do you have a strategy to pay for college? Or because, you know, it's called financial aid, it's not called pay it all for school, right? And
Right.
unfortunately, not all of us are able to receive full rights for college. We can receive
Sure.
some help, but not all.
So this is similar, grants and scholarships. You're asked basically, what kind of skin do you have in the game? What commitment has your organization, or what have you as an individual committed to this process? And what is that of your partners? So in this case, that would probably be family members or people that have already committed, like you've already received scholarships or your church has given you dollars or whatever. So, you know, if there is no effort on your part, like I've had a part-time job for 2 years and I've been able to save $3,000 towards my own college, right? For some people, that's a huge amount of money to be able to save working minimum wage in high school. So being able to say that shows, you know what, I'm not asking for a free ride. I'm asking for a matching dollar, or I'm asking for assistance because I'm working as hard as I can and I'm still just not there. My family isn't able to contribute much, but they've given me $2,000, or my local church has given me a $1,500 scholarship each year for my 4 years of school, whatever. So yes, being able to work ahead of time and know that your contribution is going to make a huge difference in the eyes of the people that you're requesting dollars from, that's a big piece. And again, that takes planning, because if you don't realize until your senior year that you might need a job and you might need to start saving some of your own dollars, that kind of hurts. Yeah. So those are definitely things to consider.
Juana, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to, you know, as as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking about the conversations that I've had with students and families where there are students that have applied to, they do prepare, and they prepare somehow, but they're applying to scholarships, and a lot of times they get very discouraged because they don't receive a scholarship, right? They're not, they apply maybe to 10 scholarships and they don't receive any, or maybe they receive one. So it really like kind of like affects the student, where their self-esteem kind of is like low, and they're like, well, like I've done everything right. Like I participated in extracurricular activities. I volunteered in hospitals because I want to be a nurse, or I want to be a doctor. And you mentioned the competition, and the competition is real. There is a lot of competition. And when Juanes talks about look locally, a lot of times those local scholarships are not as competitive. But I think that you really have to look at scholarship that students are applying for, and see if you are a good candidate for that. So, like, do you meet all the requirements for those scholarships?
Yep.
Because the competition is out there. It's really out there. And so I feel like sometimes, you know, scholarship committees are looking for a certain type of student. And a lot of times, you know, students don't really understand that the competition is there. So can you talk a little bit about, like, what is it that these organizations or companies are looking for in students? And I know that it's going to be probably different, but what is the main thing that they're looking for in a student?
So you're right. That answer is different for every foundation or individual company. And the answer is the same for grant writing. You don't want to submit a bunch of random scholarship requests without talking to the people at that organization first, whether it's your church or a community foundation or a business or a company. Most of the time, they're going to have a contact, whether it's a phone number or an email. And there are a couple of things that I would ask. One would be starting off with, I've done some research and I feel like I'm a really great prospect for this scholarship, and this is why. I would love to ask someone a few questions before I submit an application. Who can I talk to, right? Like, ask those questions first. Get that person on the phone and find out how many people normally apply for the scholarship and how many people get funded. Right? So if you have 1,000 people applying and you're only going to fund 10, we can all do the math there and say, realistically, this is your percentage chance that you're going to get a grant. So let's go into this with some very realistic expectations. And that might also help people determine, do I want to spend my time and energy and resources applying for this thing that I have a 1% chance of getting? Or do I want to apply for these other 5 that I have a 25% chance of getting? Where do you want to spend your energy? Because it does take a lot of time and energy, and some applications require a fee associated with them. So, you know, where do you want to spend your resources? And knowing some of that information ahead of time will help. When you get that person on the phone or email, you can also ask the question, is there anything particular you feel like the committee is looking for this year? Because I want to make sure that I'm really a great candidate. I don't want to waste your time reviewing my application, and I also don't want to waste my time submitting it if you feel like I'm not, you know, going to be competitive. And doing that in a very humble way, not like, hey, I don't want to waste my time, but in a very like, I want to be respectful of your time too. Sometimes you will get some feedback there and sometimes you won't, right? Sometimes they'll say, well, technically you qualify, so you should submit an application, or I encourage you to put a proposal in, or whatever. And they can't really tell you not to apply if you meet all the criteria and you qualify. So that's about the most you can do proactively on your end to determine, what do I need to know? Do I feel like I'm a good fit? Should I put my time and energy into this? Beyond that, it's really up to the committee that reviews it. And unfortunately, we don't have an ability to reach out to them unless you know someone personally. So just like with grants for nonprofits, it's kind of a do your best due diligence and then go from there.
And those are really, really great points. And thank you for sharing that. Because, you know, sometimes we don't think about calling in advance or asking, like, you know, what are you looking for? Would you say, I know that a lot of scholarships and grants probably, they do require some type of written statement. Would you say that the written statement, like, how important would you say it is? Like,
I think it depends on the committee. You know, I've never sat in on a scholarship review, and they all have different requirements because I used to submit them myself. I would think that for admissions to a school, that letter and that statement that you put in there is hugely important, because that's also a very competitive cycle. They can only let so many people into the college. They have to choose the most diverse, the best representation of who they want on campus. And if you have, you know, 1,000 people applying for these 100 slots, there has to be a way to eliminate them. And unfortunately, and this is the thing that it's very difficult for parents to understand, and it's really hard for students to hear, is sometimes there's not a real good reason that you didn't get selected. Sometimes it's just, we had so many great applications, yours just wasn't chosen this year, and we're sorry. And that's all you're ever going to get, you know, and it's nothing you did wrong, and it's nothing you did, you know, you could have done better. It's just, you didn't get selected. And that's the most difficult piece. So if someone's working with a counselor and someone has their parents' support, or they're working with a teacher at their school, hopefully they have a second set of eyes looking over those essays that they're putting together. And as long as they're submitting the highest quality proposals that they can, that's really all they can do. I mean, I don't know what weight that weighs, because I think every single review committee will be different, but they wouldn't ask for it if there wasn't a reason that they were needing it or wanting it. So at least you know that they're looking at it for something, but just don't know what weight it carries.
Right. Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, where it really is going to depend on the committee. I have had the opportunity to sit in a couple of committees, and I cannot emphasize how important that written statement was. And it may be the same or different for others, right? But I think that in a lot of cases, they are looking at it, and it can be the determining factor. So one of the things that we really encourage, or I encourage, and I think Juan is this too, in talking to students, is to not be afraid to like share their story, like especially if they're writing a personal statement, to share your story, because like you said, Mandy, they want diverse students, right? If they're gonna give a scholarship or admission to university, they want a diverse group of students. So thank you for sharing that information. It was really great.
Sure.
So we have identified some places where we want to submit an application. We have identified creative ways of finding those people. We have identified what they're looking for in a way. And 2 points that I wanted to make before. One, reading. Mandy mentioned, like, make sure you read what they're asking you to submit, because I feel like a lot of times we are on this autopilot mode, not to be, everybody's busy, everybody has a lot of things, especially, if you are in your senior year, your junior year, there's a lot of stuff going on, but a lot of times we're not reading those directions specific. And Mandy, I know you, in the time we spent together, you talked to us very kindly about read directions, and then also to submit a quality proposal, and this time an application. What is that means?
So we always say, don't write one word of your proposal or your application until you've read every word of the guidelines. And there's guidelines of scholarships as well, or competitions. You want to read them all. Don't start at the top and be like, oh yeah, I think I'm a good fit, and then, taper off. Read them all the way to the end, because you might get to that last guideline and realize, oh, I'm actually not a good fit. And if you take the time to really read the guidelines, you're going to save yourself time going forward. But the other thing is, if you cannot follow instructions, you need to get someone to help you filling out your proposals or your scholarships, because that is the basic. You want to do exactly what they're asking you to do, answer the questions exactly as they're written. Don't try to interpret stuff. If you're like, I don't really know what they're asking for here, call them, email them, be like, hey, I'm working on my application and I would love some clarification on this one particular question. Can you tell me if I'm, looking at it the right way, or if I'm going in the right direction? So don't waste your time if you're not going to be detail oriented, and do what they ask you to do. If they ask you to submit 3 copies stapled, don't submit 3 copies paperclips. So those little details are the things when organizations get overwhelmed with submissions, they have to figure out some way to weed them out. And the first thing that's easy to do is, who didn't follow instructions? So follow instructions, have somebody double check it after you. It seems silly, but I'm telling you, it's very important.
Talk to us about, so now we have an application in front of us, right? And sometimes I even, I'm reading some of these applications and I cannot even understand the application. So an application, I guess, also is a way to, it's your first impression, Mandy. I mean,
yes, it is.
So
Yes.
tell us how, when you are applying to funding, to find different funding resource, talk to us about that process with the application itself.
Sure. So there's a couple of things here. I'm going to give you an example that I haven't shared in years, because I literally just forgot about it. And I might have told you this one when you were in my class, because when you said that, I was like, oh, I remember one. So your proposal, if you haven't had a chance to meet the staff at a a funding organization, whether it's a scholarship or foundation or company or a church, if you haven't had a chance to meet them in person yet, your application is going to be your first impression, right? So you want to make sure that it is neat and well presented and arrives safely. So there's some things to consider, like what kind of envelope did you put it in? Did you have a 10-piece packet that you tried to fold up and put into a regular size envelope that was busting at the edges? Did you put it in a manila envelope and handwrite very sloppily an address? Did you use colored marker? Did it look professional, or did it look like your 5-year-old did it? What does your copy paper look like? Is it wrinkled? Is it flat? Did you use colored ink? Did you use black ink? Have you written stuff in on a handwritten application and you're trying to mail that in? Or did you type it and print it out from the computer? I had a lady submit a registration for an event to me way back in the day before I had online applications. She had to print out, write it, send it to me in the mail. And it came to me with this big yellow spot on the first page that initially I thought was a coffee stain, but still was like, who would send this to someone? It ended up being cat pee. And I could tell when the ammonia hit me in the face after I opened the envelope. It was horrible. But the fact that she would have sent it to me was shocking. And that was my first impression of her. So then when I met her in person, she was the crazy cat lady. I'd never even met her before, right? That was my assumption going forward. I had someone try to print off a grant application, one of my clients back in the day. They ran out of black ink. So half of the applications were in black ink and the other half were in blue ink. I was like, well, that doesn't look professional. People run out of the same type of paper. So they put a different weight paper in. So you have all these that are like real flimsy, thin paper and these that are regular. It just looks unprofessional. People use paper clips that are rusty, and I'm just like, they're little bitty details that really let another person know about you before they meet you. So you want to make sure that you're being as professional as possible. And I do realize resources can be a problem sometimes. I would bet that if you work with your school counselors and you need some stuff to submit your applications, that they can help provide you with manila envelopes or regular paper clips or printing documents at the school if you need it. So I would encourage you to ask for resources before you just try to throw something together. I have a colleague that always says done is better than perfect. I don't always agree with that. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be at least respectfully professional.
So now a lot of applications nowadays, Mandy, are also online. So sometimes that also becomes a way for you to present yourself.
Yes.
When we're looking, and sometimes we laugh because when students create a CFNC account, that actual information moves into their application, their college application. So
Sure.
If they have no capital letters and things like that, it looks just like that. So that's the first impression that the school may have about them if they're not careful. Talk to us about any strategy that you have when you are doing online application.
So there's a couple of things to remember with online applications, and you may not know this yet, but many times online applications have either character or word restrictions for their answers. But the crazy thing is some systems are set up to just let you keep typing. You can type as long as you want, right? And you're like, well, why do they have character limits? Because I got everything from my 500-word document in there. But the thing you don't know is that when they print that out on their end, it only shows the characters that they have it set to show. They never see all the rest of that stuff. So don't feel like you're getting one over on people that have online applications. Some of them just don't have them set up very well, and you can put a whole bunch of stuff in there. They don't see it. So that's one. And two, you want to make sure you have administrator contact information, even if it's an email, in case there's something on the application that you're like, this doesn't pertain to me, but there's not like a NA or does not apply. You have to answer it in some way. And so that comes up. If it's possible, I encourage you to see if you can look at all the questions before you start working on the applications, because then you can be prepared and you can ask questions ahead of time to make sure that you have all the content to fill it out. And the last thing I would say is make sure that you know, can you save your information and go back and fill out more later, or do you have to complete the process when you're on the application? Because You don't want to fill out half an application and realize, oh man, I've got an appointment, I've got to leave the house, and then lose all your content and have to start over when you come back. So those are a few things to think about as you work on online applications. And always, always, always make sure that you get a copy of your application or a confirmation that it was received.
Juana?
Wow, I just like, I'm over here taking notes. Because I'm like, I just wish that, I feel like, you know, we don't have these conversations sometimes with students, like no one's having these conversations with them. But this is really, I mean, this is really great information to know and just to have. And like I said, I'm over here taking notes. And I think it is really important, everything that you mentioned, Mandy, like you have to make sure that everything that you said, that when you're prepared for the preparation, part of the planning, when you are doing an application, and it is part of that first impression. It definitely is part of that first impression that a lot of times we don't think of. Like during the committees, like I've been part of committees, like I have gotten applications where they're written like very sloppy. And immediately when I look at them, I'm like, I don't even think that I want to consider this student's application, because it didn't seem like there was a lot of effort that was put in. And you look at somebody else's application that they do everything correct, like it's very neat. They typed up their page, they wrote in pen, it's really neat. And so like, I definitely hear where you're coming from, because it can affect the decision that like the committee is making when they're selecting the application. So thank you for sharing all of that. Really, really great strategies and suggestions.
So Mandy, the student or the person have submitted the application. Yeah. So we went through all that work, submitted the application, and I think Juana kind of mentioned already this. And then we never hear back. Or,
yeah,
like Juana mentioned, you get a no. Guide us through how you work through those two scenarios, because if I know one thing about you, is you're most likely gonna keep that door open somehow. So I wanna learn how you do that.
So the first thing I would say is, if you receive a no, if you feel so inclined to write a thank you note for the opportunity to apply, that's what I would recommend. It takes 5 minutes. Yeah, I realize it was a no, but you just don't know how far that's going to go for you at some point in the future. So that's what you do with the no's. If it's a yes, or if it's a you don't hear back, like you just didn't hear back, I always mark my calendar. If they gave you a time frame, like you should hear back within this time frame, I mark my calendar, and then if I didn't hear back, I reach out to them. Be like, hey, I know stuff comes up and there's a lot going on right now. I was just checking on the status of my application. I haven't heard back yet, and I received information that I should hear back by this date, whatever. And so that just shows that you're being proactive on your end. You're not calling early. You're not being a pain. You're not being bothersome. You're just being proactive, right? If you don't get a time frame of when you should hear back when you apply initially, you want to ask that question. That's also a great question to ask a program officer or someone at the foundation or scholarshiping organization is, hey, so I see that deadlines are August 4th. If we were selected for a scholarship, when should we hear back, right? And so that way you have a time frame. Some places don't tell you that up front. If you don't ask, you're just going to kind of be twiddling your thumbs wondering forever. So, the other thing is, maybe they already mailed you a scholarship check or a letter saying you're getting one, but you put in your wrong address and it went to the neighbor's house, or it went somewhere else instead. Believe me, that's happened before. So, maybe they're like, we already sent that. And then you have to figure out, where did it go and whatnot. So it's always good to follow up in those ways. Be proactive ahead of time, know what the time frame is. Keep it on your calendar, follow back up if you don't hear, and thank for the opportunity to apply. If you get funding, definitely write a thank you letter expressing your gratitude. And it doesn't even hurt to follow up after the first year of school and let them know how their dollars impacted your ability to go to college for a year.
Absolutely, because college, it's, for some students, that's going to be a technical degree. For some others, it's 4 years plus. And if if you're doing your master's or your doctoral degree, some of them can continue to fund depending on kind of what boundaries they have. So it's a big, they're investing in you as much as you're investing in them. It's kind of like this win-win situation. Juana, you
Well,
had
they can also they can refer you to other people that they know in the funding world and be like, hey, I know you're past your, initial 4-year degree with us, but we have this partner that funds, next level education. I'd love to connect you with them. But if you don't keep building that relationship, you lose out on those opportunities to network.
Yeah. And I was going to mention something similar where I think that when you do follow up, if you do tell, if you do receive a scholarship and you follow up and say, hey, this scholarship really helped impacted me get through this first year of college, or, thanks to the scholarship, I was able to finish my degree, obtain my degree. And then also, I think that it helps to maintain those connections. And I was going to ask Mandy, is it common for, you might have kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but if a student does not get a grant or a scholarship, if they ask for feedback, what has been your experience and then being able to get feedback on like, why did not receive a scholarship? Because sometimes students are looking for like, well, I don't understand like why I didn't get it. Like I feel like I met all the requirements. If they reach out, could they get any feedback on why maybe or
Sure. It really depends on the organization and the number of applications they received. Sometimes, the program staff will say, we don't, it was a great application. We don't have any negative feedback for you. You just weren't selected. That's kind of a big, huge common response. Sometimes there is something specific, right? Like we were really looking for people that had a little more of this experience or had this GPA or had this on their SATs or whatever. And then sometimes it's specific. More often than not, this is going to happen in the grant world where there's specific feedback you can change and apply again in the future. Scholarships, not so much, because once you miss a scholarship before you get into college, there's less likelihood that you can apply for it once you're actually in college. There are some opportunities, but not as many. So definitely asking helps, but I'm not sure how much it helps as far as like reapplying.
Right. Yeah, and I think also when they are reaching out, one of the questions that they can ask, when they're thanking them, thank you for the opportunity, are you aware of other scholarships or are there other connections? Sometimes they might be able to get more scholarship information, or they may be able to connect them, but like you said, they won't know if they don't connect or reach out and kind of send that thank you note, and just be proactive like you mentioned.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what I like to do is usually like conclude the process with some sort of opportunity. Let's keep it open. And students, we have talked about relationship building so much, connecting with people, connecting with friends, connecting with your counselor. So because a lot of those opportunities come by relationships. Mandy, one thing that we like to do in our cafecitos is provide an advice for students, parents, and counselors, because those are kind of the big three that we work with very closely. If you had any advice, and you can give more than one, so anything that that you can think of, it can be at any part of the process.
So I think for counselors, and it's good information for others to know, but for counselors, if you can educate yourself on some of the things we've talked about, like how to teach them to be proactive, the questions they need to ask, that type of thing, and then helping them role play that. Even with the adults that I work with that have nonprofits or that are executive directors, like they don't know what to say when they call someone. They're horrible at what they consider cold calling. And there are some very simple questions you want to have the answer to. So that could be really, really helpful for the success of someone. Even if you're sitting in the office with them and be like, hey, let's call in together. Let's see how this goes, right? Role play for them and give them, because that's how kids learn, right? From the time you're little, you're mimicking what your parents say to learn to talk. You're copying what someone else wrote to learn to write. How do you expect people to know just this is what you should call and say to somebody that's going to give you a scholarship for college because you've never been before and you've never had to do it? So I think that's hugely important, and it doesn't happen. I honestly don't know anyone that's ever done that. So that's just a suggestion. And then empowering those students and giving them the resources some students don't have that support at home, right? So when we worked at Central Latino, Juan, you remember this, you have a lot of kids who have parents with a third grade education level. They don't know what to say. They don't speak English. They don't have the resources to help their kids, but those kids qualify for a ton of funding. So where do we get those resources to them? How are we teaching that to them? Maybe it's one of these Cafecitos to talk about, like, hey guys, this is what role playing looks like. Juan's going to play the foundation person. Mandy's going to play the student. Let's give them a call, right? Marie and I do that kind of stuff on our YouTube channel all the time. So that's another resource that just kind of makes sense, and coming up with a couple of scenarios, like you feel like you're a perfect fit, you want to be sure. That's one call. I have no idea if I'm a perfect fit because I can't find your guidelines. I'm just making an initial call to get some information. That's a different call. I've already submitted my application. I'm calling to check up and see the status of it. That's a different call, right? So I think that's helpful. And then again, just reinforcing to start as early as you can, and to start having those conversations about what do you think you might like to do? Because I know that when kids are in high school, heck, some of my friends who are 40 still don't know what they want to do. It's hard to say, like, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, and no, I want to go to school for this, and this is the category I'm looking in, but to at least start exploring those conversations and say, what things do you enjoy? What things bring you joy? If you don't like being out in the sun and you don't like being hot, you probably aren't going to want to do lawn maintenance and landscaping for the rest of your life. So, let's have some realistic conversations, whether that happens at home with parents and we empower them to have those conversations, or whether it happens with counselors or wherever it needs to be happening, So those are the things that I would think about, just to kind of empower the kids to know they can do it. Because I think that's the biggest thing I see, is that people are afraid because they've never had to, they've never been taught how, and so they just don't.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Juana, anything, concluding thoughts, comments? Before we leave, Mandy, I would love for people to access some of the resources that you have for free. I'm actually one of the I have benefited tremendously. The role play conversation is fantastic, and you already have it on your website, because it is having that example of someone who's doing it, and in the way that you do it, just so so relaxed. I feel like it was very helpful to me in the beginning of my career to watch some of those resources that you have, even though it's funding nonprofits. I feel like education is a nonprofit, is a big nonprofit, but a lot of the resources can be used. So before we leave, I would love for you to give us, how could people get in touch with you? How can they find those free resources?
There's 3 huge resources we have that are free. One is our YouTube channel. So it's just fundingforgood.com youtube.com/fundingforgood. And then we have a blog section on our website. So fundingforgood.org, in the upper right corner, just blogs. You can search that by any word or category that you want, and it'll pull up all kinds of information. So whether it's an event or an article or a video that we have, it'll pop up there. And then on our website, we also have actually 2 more things. We have a calendar of events. So we have a lot of free webinars. We actually did one this morning. We have one this afternoon. So there's always upcoming stuff, and you can register for those. They actually say free in the title, so you'll know which ones they are. We have a free grant writing webinar coming up tomorrow. Well, this is recorded, so June 4th, 2020. And then we also have a tab on the website that's called Free Stuff. And there's templates, there's webinars, there's all kinds of stuff you can download for free and make your own. Everything from grant writing and research resources to board development, and then general resources for nonprofits. So all that stuff's created for free. Please go out and use it, access it, share it, and email us and let us know if you need something created that's not already there, and we're happy to look at that as well.
And maybe this is a good place for the free stuff, for that checklist maybe in the future.
Yes,
that you'll
maybe.
create for scholarships, because I feel like you just that's a wonderful idea that we can learn from you in funding for good. So thank you so much, Mandy. I appreciate your expertise, your
Thank
time,
you for having me.
what you do for our communities to make them better. So I'm just really grateful that we have someone like you and a resource like you, and we can learn so much. I learned so much about you and about what you do every time we're together. So thank you for sharing with our audience today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mandy, for just helping us to think outside the box and think creative. Lee, when we're looking for funds for college or for our organizations. And so everything that you shared, I really appreciate it. And I really hope that students, counselors, parents will take this information and really use it because you do have a wealth of knowledge that you share with us. And thank you also for the free resources. I'm definitely going to take a look at them
Sure.
and hope others will take advantage of that as well.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you for having me.